Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, I'm Marcus Simon. I am your host for this week's edition of the Inside Scoop. Looking forward to a great program today. We've got two great guests to talk with, and to you about. We're going to do that. I didn't practice this week, you can tell. So I'm here with, let's start with our first guest. Our first guest is Chris Falcon. Chris is the newly elected clerk of the Circuit Court in Fairfax County. So we're going to talk to Chris. He's a number of firsts as far as clerks are concerned. We'll hear about that. We'll hear about a little bit about his background, about what he's doing as clerk and what he has planned for the future. So Chris, welcome.
Marcus, thanks for having me on tonight.
All right, very good. So you were elected back in November, and so about almost exactly 6 months ago, you're about a half a year in to your first term as the clerk of the Fairfax County Circuit Court. Tell us a little bit what the Circuit Clerk does in Fairfax. Just sort of give us an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So your Circuit Court clerk is in charge of operations at the County Circuit Court. So we're the main administrative officer. So if you think of the chief judge, kind of like your CEO, the clerk of the Circuit Court is your CEO, your chief of operations. So managing behind the scenes, issuing all the marriage licenses for all the county residents that want to come in. If you want to get married here, you have to come and get a marriage license first. Registering all the wills when people pass away. That's one of our main duties, is taking in wills and last testament. And then this is one you probably know very well, recording all deeds and land instruments. So those are the top three, but there is a lot more that we handle. All of the civil cases that happen in Fairfax County, if they're above a certain amount, a civil matter when Party A sues Party B, those come to your Circuit Court clerk to be filed. All of the criminal cases that are felony and above happen in our court as well.
So you support the judges essentially administratively, make sure that they have everything that they need to try those cases and move those dockets along?
Exactly. So all of the staff that work for the judges, the court clerks, the law clerks, those are all under my purview. So it's a over 170 person office. And
I think a lot of people are surprised to know that the clerk of the court is an elected position, but it's sort of an elected position. I mean, you're elected, the people put you in office, but then you get like an 8-year term, right?
That's
right. That's like the longest. I think a lot of us that are sort of 2-year terms and 4-year terms are jealous. I'd love to only have to run for re-election once every 8 years. Why do you think that is? I mean, I guess is it part because it's sort of not really a political job? You have to be able to sort of do a lot of administrative work and to get some continuity in the office, or how did that? Do you have any idea how that came to be?
I think that's part of it. I know that also there's some writing out there that suggests that it dates back to the Bird machine as well. But I believe because of the fact that it's not, I believe, that much of a political office either. It's more of running the justice system. They want some continuity there and to not be changing it all the time.
Gotcha. Well, I'll talk to my friend Michael Pope about the role of the Bird machine in all of this. It does make sense. I guess that's right, because they also administered the elections and things like that, and so you didn't want to be able to turn them out too easily.
Absolutely.
So, long term, so you are replacing a clerk, John Fry, who served, your predecessor served for 32 years before you?
That's right. Okay,
so you've had 6 months. Have you undone everything that he did, or not yet?
No, not quite. I mean, I have to give a lot of credit to Mr. Fry. It was well-run office. There are things that I ran on that changes, enhancements that I wanted to bring, and we've been busy getting to work, creating and rolling some of those out. But no, I mean, the staff by and large is the same. There have been some changes made, obviously, at the top of the office and some other places, but I'm very excited that we were able to roll out satellite service in Reston 2 months ago.
So tell me about that. What do you mean satellite service?
Yep.
Right? Has it been that everybody just Fairfax is a pretty large county. Everybody has to come into the city, into the little part of the county that's in the city, to get their work done?
That's right, and that's the impetus for creating service outside of Fairfax City. Because I think while I was campaigning for this job for a year and a half, I traveled all over Fairfax County, and it's an enormous county, as you know, and it's a long way from Reston to get all the way to the Fairfax Circuit Court in Fairfax City. It's a long way from South County, Lorton, and Mount Vernon to come all the way there. And right now, legally, you have to do that that to pick up your marriage license or to get these records and apply for concealed carry permits and do things like that. So that's why while I was running for the office, we came up with this idea that what about one day a month you can come to another location and do some of these tasks, and there'll be staff from the circuit court that will be there, and we can let that part of the community know on those days you can plan some of your things and you can go right to Reston to get your marriage license. So the second Tuesday of every month we come back to Reston. We're at the Kathy Hudgens Community Center from 9 a.m. to noon, and we're happy there to serve the public and be providing greater access to court services. That was something I campaigned on hard, and I'm excited that we've been able to deliver that.
I mean, I know the courthouse is centrally located physically in the county, but it's not terribly accessible to folks that are transit dependent or other things. And so, yeah, I think going out to Reston and sending your folks to the public as opposed to telling them they have to come to you.
Well, you nailed it on that. I mean, transit dependent. I am very privileged. I own a vehicle. A lot of my neighbors are not in that same situation. So we've tried to keep those things in mind. We've tried to keep one Fairfax in mind when coming up with these initiatives so that people who may not own their own vehicles and be dependent on bus and Uber and Lyft, or may not have time off from their job and they only have 30 minutes to come and do that thing, right? Or may not have child care, can come and bring their kids to a location at a community center where they don't have to go in through security.
Yeah,
So.
I can't help but think about that viral video clip of the guy who had a court date, even though it was remote, for driving without a license, and he was there driving around in his car. But I'm told that happens more often than you might realize in Fairfax, that people show up for their traffic court dates and they have no other way to get there but in a car, and that if you wanted to sort of sit out in the parking lot, you could get a lot of people for that.
Past traffic defense lawyer says yes, that happens.
That happened. So tell us a little about your background, about you. So I mean, I don't think many people grow up in elementary school saying, I want to be the clerk of the circuit court when I grow up, right? But you are a local. You're from here in Fairfax. How did you come to serve in this role in Fairfax County? So tell us a little about your upbringing, how you came to be a Fairfax resident. You're a lifelong resident, as I understand.
I am, yeah, absolutely. I was born at Fairfax Hospital. My proud son of immigrant parents. My dad is originally from Peru. My mom is originally from Ecuador. And they lived in DC for a little bit and then came and moved into the Seven Corners area of Falls Church. When I was born, we were living in the area of Falls Church that's near where Annandale Road and Route 50 meet. And I grew up going to the Fairfax County Public Schools. So much credit to our school system for where I am today. I did not grow up wanting to be the clerk of the circuit court. No, by no means was that my dream. I wanted to get to college. So my parents came to this country to pursue their higher education. Those dreams, unfortunately, were deferred to us, but they lived those out, seeing my brother become the first person in our family to graduate from college, becoming the first person in our family to go to law school and become an attorney. So I followed in his footsteps, but a lot of that started at Frost Middle School in the mid-90s when I got to play a lawyer in our mock trial unit during civics class. And when that happened, it piqued that interest, and I said to myself, well, maybe this is a career that I might be able to pursue one day. It's a long shot, but why not? And to my educators, so much credit to them for fostering that and pushing me to seek more. And thankfully, I ended up at James Madison University, where a lot of those dreams and those values got honed, and I came out of there knowing I wanted to go to law school. But I practiced as a trial lawyer in Fairfax County for a number of years, and I actually met Mr. Fry, my predecessor, at the first day in practice continuing legal ed course that was given in Fairfax County, and he presided over that. And it's amazing, I've said to him that you were there when I started my legal career, and he handed over the reins at my swearing-in ceremony in January.
That's pretty amazing, pretty amazing. So you went to law school, you got your law degree, you practiced some, and then you wound up in the clerk's office over in Arlington with both of our mutual good friend, Paul Ferguson.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about what you did for Paul and how that sort of trained you to take on the role that you've got today.
Absolutely. Paul Ferguson is one of my mentors, a good friend. I went to go work for him in 2014. So I had been practicing law for about a little over 6 years at that point. And we met up for coffee, and he encouraged me to apply for a position that he had open in his office running his civil division. So what I came in to do was to supervise the civil division, which I had experience doing in my legal practice. But over time and over the years, years, my role grew. I also managed our elections and ballot program, because that's something I forgot to mention. All of those ballots, every single election, they all come to us. That is what I was doing last week at this time, getting ready to go back to the courthouse to take in all of the ballots from the primaries, because that's one of our statutory roles in that office.
And again, like we were saying earlier, maybe the reason that the Bird machine was so interested in making sure they knew who the circuit
there
court
you
clerks
go.
were. But okay.
But then over time too, one of in Paul's office, I loved working for Paul, because he would see if you were good at something, he would give you more responsibility and throw more things at you, And the day came that I asked to be considered to become the in-house legal counsel for the office, and I was very grateful to have that opportunity, where being in-house counsel, I got to oversee all of our operations, but also compliance. When the laws change every year on July 1st, a lot of times our circuit court clerk is the one that's reviewing those law changes and working in conjunction with your chief judge of the circuit court to see how we're actually going to operationalize those and make sure we're compliant with all of those law changes. So that was a fantastic time. I joke with him that when we met, he was like, yeah, come for a year or two and see what you think. I was there 9.5 years. So I loved the job. And I've said this before, one of the things that was most appealing to it is that I got to work with unrepresented parties every day. People that come into the court with no legal assistance, no lawyers, and they're trying to handle their own divorces, their own custody cases, their own eviction cases, their own appeals of their unemployment decisions. So their estates for their loved ones, for their spouses. So to me, as an attorney, I thought there was no greater opportunity to go in and work directly with the people in my community that need assistance. And in that role, I wasn't there to be their lawyer. I was there to connect them with legal resources.
Right. I was going to say, it's sort of a fine line. It probably would be hard as an attorney, right? Because a lot of times you know the answer. You want to tell them not just how to do it, but what to do. Like, here's what you should do. You can't do that, right? I mean, that's the line you can't
Exactly.
cross.
We can't do that, but I can say to them, well, I can't give you legal advice, but here's a free legal aid clinic that meets every Saturday at St. Anthony's Legal Aid Clinic in Coolmore from 9 to 11 a.m., where you can go in and meet with lawyers and get help with that situation. So, I mean, I got so much joy from connecting people with resources the whole decade.
Gotcha. And so when we get back, we're sort of running out of time for this segment. We've got one more segment to go. We'll probably talk about some of the ways that you've taken that that joy in connecting people and how you've operationalized that in Fairfax. Talk about some of the things that you guys have got going on already. And we talked a little bit about the satellite office, but we'll talk about some ideas that you have. We'll talk a little bit about expungement clinics and what role the clerk's office plays in that. And again, what other big plans you have for the future of the Fairfax County Circuit Court office. So again, I'm here with our guest today. Is Chris Falcon, the newly elected Circuit Court Clerk in Fairfax County. And we'll be back in just a few minutes on the Inside Scoop to talk about his new job.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors. Come on, that's it. Let's go.
Oh, Dad, wait till you see the bike we got for Jake.
Hearing loss happens gradually with age, making it easy to ignore. Yet most older Americans aren't getting their hearing tested. Untreated hearing loss can keep your loved ones from enjoying what they cherish most.
Dad, can you hear me?
Don't let that happen. Speak up about hearing loss. You'll be glad you did.
You can't buy a best friend. You can love them, pet them, care for them, whether they want you to or not. You can take a picture, you can jump, yell, you can fly to the moon, travel the world, or just stay in bed. You can't buy a best friend like that, but you can adopt one. 'Cause we're connected.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hey, and we're back. I'm Marcus Simon. I'm your host for this week's edition of the Inside Scoop. We're here with our guest, Chris Falcon. He's the new Circuit Court Clerk in Fairfax County. He's 6 months into the job, relatively new. We'll be talking with my friend Sarah Taylor from the Fairfax County Advisory Disability Services Board, in just a minute. But we've got one more segment with Chris before we get to Sarah. So that's coming up to look forward to. But Chris, we were just talking about some of the things you learned in Arlington, working for Paul Ferguson as one of his deputies and as the chief legal counsel there. And so you've taken that, and we talked a little bit earlier about some of the initiatives you've already taken on to bring the circuit court to the community. Talk about a couple of other initiatives. You talked about some things in the campaign that you want to bring from Arlington to Fairfax. Give us an idea of a couple of things that you've started to implement and how that's going.
Absolutely. So one thing that I'm very, very excited to announce tonight is that we're going to be rolling out our free online public case information program, e-case search, on July 1st. Now that is something that I campaigned on, that and it's true to this moment, that Fairfax County is the only county in Virginia that does not provide free online access to public case information. So what does that mean? It means if there's a circuit court case in Fairfax that's pending, you can't go on your phone right now and see the different things that have been filed, the names of those filings. You can't see what the upcoming hearing dates are. We're changing that. Come July 1st, no one can say that anymore, because there will be no county remaining in Virginia that doesn't provide that information.
Sort of weird that Fairfax, like one of the wealthiest, largest counties, and we sort of pride ourselves on being sort of tech forward, is the last one to get on board. Is it because it's behind a paywall now? Is that what the issue is?
It is. It's behind a paywall called the Court's Public Access Network, CPAN, and it's my program, so I'm going to be gentle with it, but I am going to criticize it right now. It's a program that you have to pay $150 for 3 months of access to be able to find that public case information, and I was very critical of that while I was campaigning for this position, so I'm very glad that 6 months in, we'll be able to finally bring that paywall down. To me, it is a great disservice to the people that have to represent themselves in Fairfax County, that they can't find information about their cases right now if they don't subscribe to CPAN. I've also talked to numerous attorneys, especially court-appointed counsel, who say they don't pay for CPAN. I mean, it's too expensive, so they check the case information when they're in court, and when they're there, they'll sit down at the terminals and pull the files and look at them.
Wow, seems like very 1990 or so, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an enormous access to justice issue. It was a huge annoyance when I was in practice that I couldn't find the information in my own home county, but I could find that in Prince William, in Loudoun, in Arlington. So we're very glad, but I also have to give a lot of credit here. We hoped to be able to, jump on the Virginia Supreme Court program, but instead that didn't work out, so we've created it. We've developed a program in-house in Fairfax County with Fairfax County staff. Circuit Court, our IT department worked along with the Fairfax County Department of Information Technology, DIT, right, and have created a solution, a program, all ourselves. Gotcha. And did it within existing budget.
Was the problem that our existing database was too big for the Supreme Court to just take it on, or just turned out to not be quite that simple?
It was not quite that simple. It is a huge database. I am not, believe me, that is the big part of it. But it's also about different programs talking to each other.
Sure.
And another exciting part of it, I'm sorry, I'm going on about this because I'm really excited,
no,
but
okay,
it is going to be even better than the state program because we're actually going to provide it in the 6 most frequently spoken at home languages other than English, as told by Fairfax County Public Schools. So it'll also be available in Spanish, in Vietnamese, in Korean, in Mandarin, in Amharic, and Arabic.
Wow.
So anyone that wants to can select from the menu those languages and have the program translated.
That reminds me of something. So you're, in addition to being a new clerk in Fairfax County, you're a historic first. You're the first Latino person to be not just the Fairfax County Circuit Court, but the clerk of any circuit court in Virginia. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, I mean, it's wild to still hear that because that means a lot to a lot of the people in the Latino community, but I became the first Latino elected clerk of the court in Virginia history. I certainly hope to not be the last, but yeah, it's amazing. But it's also something that a record that had to come down.
Had to come down at some point. Well, but it's interesting. I mean, you know, it's the idea that representation matters. I think in developing the software and the thought that, you know, we're going to be have something the state doesn't, which is the language access. Certainly, I think your background probably helped inform that decision and your sensitivity to that issue and wanting to make sure that if it's going to be a publicly accessible system, it needs to be language accessible as well.
100%. Our IT manager even said to me that during the testing phase, they had their family members using it who were primarily Spanish speaking, and they understood it. And to me, what I'm hearing is it's providing access to necessary case information to so many people who will now be able to better prepare themselves for their trials, for their hearings. So incredibly excited, but I also just have to give a lot of credit. This is a Fairfax County production created by your taxpayer dollars and your staff.
So it's funny, we talked a little bit about the idea of looking at terminals to get information, which seems kind of old school. You also, I think one of the coolest things about being clerk is you actually have access to some really old school stuff. Tell us a little bit about the history. So you're actually now, as the circuit court clerk in Fairfax County, you're the custodian of George Washington's will, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. I was very surprised after I was elected. It was the first time that I actually stepped foot in our 1799 historic courthouse. I wish I'd gotten there before, but an amazing place to go. I strongly and highly encourage people to come and visit our historic courthouse. It's open to the public on Fridays for tours, but stepping foot into that building and the Washington will, being handed the Washington will, which very safely is kept in a case, but I still was very nervous while holding it and only held it for a few seconds and then handed it back and said, put it away, please. But there's an amazing amount of history at the historic courthouse, at the historic record center. People watching at home, please come visit us. It's unreal when you walk in there and you hear about these historic cases that were tried there, and you see the writings that were left by Civil War soldiers that came in during the war, during the conflict, the war, and left drawings and left writings on some of our deed books and order books. So it's fantastic. It's very exciting. But that's our history. I mean, there's a lot of things there from George Mason and George Washington and Martha Washington and others. So it's a huge part of my job. I take it very seriously, and I think, but at the same time, it's part of our shared history, and I want people to come in and enjoy it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, again, if I were the clerk, I think it'd be the coolest thing. So what was the biggest surprise, though, right? You came in, you'd worked in Arlington, you probably figured, I mean, you kind of knew what the job was going to be, but something when you came to Fairfax must have been a big surprise. What was the biggest surprise you had after you were sworn in? Other than being handed George Washington's will, maybe.
So this answer, I hope it doesn't come across gratuitous, but the staff has been amazing. They have been so supportive of our initiatives, of these changes. I came in thinking, okay, changes are probably going to upset people or make them worried, but people have said, we want to be part of that. Like, I thought I was going to have to potentially bring in new staff to run our satellite service. People raised their hand and said, we want to do that. We'd like to go try that. That sounds great. Why not? But buy-in from staff and also support from county government. We talked about satellite service and this concept, and we had support from our Board of Supervisors, from Chairman McKay, from county staff. It was on the board agenda in January. I got a phone call from Fairfax County staff the very next day, and people said, this sounds great, tell us more. What do you envision doing? And we game planned it together, came up with the locations. I explained the idea, the different services we wanted to provide. But those have been just a few examples of an amazing amount of support from the people on the ground in terms of staff, from county government. We're working with DTA and the Fairfax County Police on other initiatives. I know we're going to get into it in a minute, but we're excited about our expungement clinic as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can get into that just one second. It's interesting. It's great to hear you say that. I think that it's funny. Some folks tell a story about local government employees, right? And the story is it's the old sign, a lack of preparation on your part does not create an emergency on my part, or whatever. It's the sloth in the animated movies at the DMV, like moving real slow. And I just don't think that story, that stereotype is applicable at all. Certainly not in Fairfax. It's been my experience working in local government and elsewhere that we have really competent, enthusiastic, excited employees. So speaking of new initiatives, another one you just talked about, talk a little bit about this expungement clinic, right? This is, again, not just sort of sitting back and letting people come to you. It's another example of sort of, pushing things out. So tell us a little bit about what an expungement clinic is all about and what your role is in helping people get, what even an expungement is.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's
in
start
3 minutes or less.
With expungement. So expungement is a law in Virginia that allows people to petition to remove criminal charges from their record for things that they were not convicted of. So things that ended either in a trial, finding not guilty, charges were dismissed, or they were null pros by the Commonwealth's attorney. The prosecutor decided not to proceed with them. What some people don't know is those charges stay on your record in Virginia unless you expunge them. And they can pop up when people apply for housing, apply for jobs, apply for credit. So the expungement clinic is an idea, not one that I came up, but that other clerk's offices and localities were starting to do. And when I worked in Arlington, we teamed up with the Commonwealth's attorney, with Parissa, our office, the clerk's office, to put together these clinics on a Saturday so that people that can't access the court Monday through Friday because of jobs and other things like that can come to a neutral location and have assistance completing paperwork to expunge criminal charges from their record. And a nonprofit or a community organization would support the filing fee so that people could do this free of charge. And they could get free legal assistance on site. So I'm very excited to announce that we will be doing that this fall, and we're partnering with Steve Descano, the Commonwealth's attorney, and also working with Supervisor Rodney Lusk in Franconia District to put on our very first expungement clinic here in Fairfax County. I don't believe that charges should continue to follow someone around for their whole life for things that did not result in a conviction. These were things that did not need to be following these folks around. So it's an opportunity to be able to help people.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. Folks that, like, clearly they had the wrong person, right? You're found not guilty, and you've got to hire a lawyer and file a petition to get your record. It doesn't happen automatically. We've introduced some legislation in Richmond to make that process more automatic. Still haven't gotten some resistance. So what you guys are doing is a great thing to sort of push it out.
The law is changing next year, obviously, to take care of some charges and convictions and things. But in the meantime, I think we need to act.
Yeah, well, we're going to make it more automatic, but working together, I think what you're doing is great. We got 1 minute. Is there some scam alerts? I was on your website. I noticed you guys are alerting. Tell us real quickly about a couple things that people should watch out for, some things you don't do as the clerk's office.
Absolutely. So we do not email you summonses. If you get a summons emailed to you claiming to be the court, that is likely not us. Please call our office. Please call the clerk's office, the Fairfax Circuit Court, and confirm. We also don't threaten you with arrest unless you pay money over the phone. We have a number of scams that are out there targeting our community here in Fairfax County, demanding money, pretending to be a lawsuit based out of Florida where people here have been named as a defendant. That is a scam. We also, the sheriff's office was used as an example where people were claiming to be members of their office. Scam. Please call the office, call the court, and confirm.
Well, Chris, thank you. It's been so great to have you on.
Thank you, Marcus.
Seems like there's more we could talk about, but we'll have to save that for another time because we have a next guest coming up. Sarah Taylor, who's on the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities and the Fairfax County Disability Services Board, will be with us to talk more about that next. So we'll be back. You're watching Inside Scoop.
So I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school.
Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And we're back again for our second guest here on this week's edition of Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Marcus Simon, and I'm joined right now by Sarah Graham Taylor. Sarah Taylor serves as the Franconia representative to the Fairfax Area Disability Services Board, and she's also on the state board for the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. I even wrote it down this time, guys, and I'm still struggling to get it all out. It's a mouthful. So Sarah's here to talk to us about all things sort of disability and what roles of a citizen person can be in helping to advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. But before we get to that, just a little bit of background. Sarah, you and I first met when you're in your old job. You were the legislative liaison for the city of Alexandria, the assistant city manager. I think you came to Richmond, if I recall correctly, to advocate for putting sewage into the Potomac River or something like that. No?
I think it was advocating for some sort of clean water, but yes.
Clean water,
yes.
All right. So we worked on that issue together, and that's where we sort of first met, and that's where I got to find out that you were somebody who worked on these things. But tell us a little bit about your background first. Before we get to the Disability Services Board, you've come to this from sort of an informed place. You've always been involved in state and local government, or not always, but for a long time. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Marcus. I really appreciate it. And it's very weird to call you Marcus, so we'll go with Delegate as well. But my background is really kind of all over the place. I came from a family of teachers, and so my parents were both teachers, and we lived in a community where there weren't a ton of opportunities available to kids in our community, and so looking for ways to get more involved. And there were little moments where I realized that there were opportunities for me to sort of stand up and say I wanted an opportunity for myself, and whether it was going to a church where they didn't allow girls to be altar servers, or being in a school that didn't have any sports for girls other than cheerleading, and spoiler alert, not really a cheerleader. So looking for ways to sort of advocate for myself and the things that I wanted out of my school or my community. And so that was sort of that first step into it. And so, being in high school and asking somebody once, is there a way to major in civics when you go to college, and getting the understanding what political science was, and looking for ways to sort of connect, wanting to make your community better, and wanting to do it on a very local level. And that's sort of where I got to eventually to local government. And so working for the city of Alexandria, and moving here and really trying to find ways for my interests and my lived experience to help others in the community. That's really how I got to these bodies that I'm really, really proud and privileged to serve on.
So you went to the University of Richmond, right? At some point. So that was sort of your entree to Virginia?
Right.
So unlike Chris, who was sort of born and bred here, you came here but via University of Richmond?
I am a Virginian by choice,
there you
not
go.
by
I
birth.
like that, right.
And went to college in Richmond. I'm from Connecticut originally, wanted to go to college far enough away that my parents couldn't just show up, but close enough that if something happened back home, I could be there, within a train ride. And so, finally made my way back to Northern Virginia after many years in various different places, San Francisco, 10 years in Oklahoma, and then made our way back to Northern Virginia specifically for my job with the city of Alexandria. And moving back here with kids really sort of put a different lens on what we looked for when we moved back here. And having a child with special needs really put an extra lens on what we were looking for when we moved back to Virginia.
So tell us about that, right? I mean, you didn't just fall into this work on disabilities, right? This is an issue that's really personally close to you and affects you and your family. So tell us a little bit about your son and what his issues are and how you've had to deal with those.
Great. My son, Graham Zeppelin Taylor, I call him my special snowflake. And all my kids are special needs in their own way, but Graham is on the autism spectrum. And Graham's autism manifests in issues related to his impulse control, behavior, his social emotional skills. He is the smartest child in every room, but he has challenges that he really needs that we need to help him learn to address. And so what we do is really look for opportunities to help him help people around him really understand who he is, how he functions, and find environments that he can function in, and give him tools to function in all kinds of environments. He is 13 now. 13 is a tough age for any kid, and he was a late diagnosis of autism. We didn't find out officially that he was on the spectrum until later than most kids. And moving here from a place like Oklahoma, which has not historically invested particularly heavily in their public school system, and certainly not in the most needy kids in their public school systems. When he went to kindergarten, he was in a class of 40 kids with one teacher. And that was his only option unless he wanted to be in the emotionally disturbed classroom, which was kindergarten through 6th grade kids. Mom did not want him to be in the emotionally disturbed classroom, so I went to school with him every day for his entire kindergarten year. And when you have a full-time job, that's a tough deal. And so when we moved here, looking for a place that had lots of options, lots of layers, lots of opportunities for him, that's really how we wound up in Fairfax County.
Gotcha. And so you now serve on, as we said, both of these boards. I think they have different roles and probably different missions and different time commitments, but let's start with Fairfax, right? So you live in the Franconia district, and you're on the Fairfax County, Fairfax Area Disability Services Board. It's not the county; it's the whole area Disability Services Board. So what is the role of the board? What does it do? And tell us a little bit about how it helps kids like Graham and all kinds of people with disabilities in Fairfax County, and what to live a full life, a life like ours, as we often call it.
Absolutely. Fairfax Area Disability Services Board, I was attracted to it for the same reason that I was attracted to getting into local government. It is the layer of service and accommodation and advocacy that is closest to the people in the community, and therefore is closest to the problems and the solutions that we can recommend to people who can make changes in our community, elected officials, folks in our school system. And so what we do is really, it's kind of fivefold. We advocate, we advise, we educate, we collaborate, and we evaluate. So our role as appointees to this board is to obviously advocate for people in the community who live with disabilities and their families, and look for opportunities to allow them to really live in the community that they choose to live in, and have all the supports that they need in order to live in our communities. We advise elected officials, we educate people in the community about the needs of people with disabilities and their families. We collaborate with other public bodies to have the lens of people with disabilities and their families really put on other issues of the community, whether it's transit, transportation, housing, education, really collaborating with other groups to do that work. And then evaluating what is being done in our community and where it can be done better in order to serve all kinds of, whether it's kids or adults and the people who support them throughout the community. Yeah,
I know we heard from you in your role on the advisory, on the Disability Services Board. In my role is when I was on the FOIA Council, the Freedom of Information Act Council. FOIA, a lot of people know that it has to do with being able to request and receive public records, but it also has to do with public meetings. And we were debating sort of during and then post-COVID the role of virtual meetings and allowing people to participate. It's one of these sort of mixed blessings that came out of COVID is we learned, hey, you can actually get a lot of business done without necessarily having to be in the same room. But as we're trying to unwind some of those COVID restrictions, the folks on the Disability Services Board said, hey, wait a second, stop for a second. And so tell us a little bit about that and what your role, I got a letter from you, I remember, but go ahead, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm that person who does FOIA bills for fun in the off season. And so that thing is exactly right. One of the things that we learned from COVID is that there are a lot of conveniences that were implemented during COVID that are actually really reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. And electronic meetings is one of those things. And so looking for ways to make service on public bodies more accessible to people with disabilities and caregivers of people with disabilities. And so last session, there was actually legislation that was carried by 2 members from Northern Virginia, Delegate Elizabeth Bennett Parker and Senator Barbara Favola. It was vetted by the FOIA Council, it was vetted by the Disability Commission, and really the idea was to allow people with disabilities and people who serve as caregivers of people with disabilities the ability to participate in meetings of public bodies remotely and count towards the quorum of that meeting. Because when a meeting is held in person, there's a certain number of people who have to be there, not to do the rules and procedure, which is really your area of expertise. But there's a certain number of people that have to be in the room in order for the meeting to be official. And when you're dealing with people with disabilities, sometimes accessing those in-person meetings is a challenge. Or if you're a caregiver of a person with a disability, accessing the meeting is a challenge. And for public bodies like disability commissions, sometimes having enough people in the room doesn't always happen.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think the way we looked at it, and it's an education process, right? It's like, well, sure, we can have one or two, right? I mean, how many people with disabilities are going to be on any given board? So as long as it's one or two, we'll let them participate remotely. And you guys say, well, what about the Disability Services Board, where actually a requirement for serving, we'll talk about this a little bit, is to be someone with a disability or be a caregiver or have some relationship with somebody who's got a disability. We're not just extras, right? We're not just, and not that you ever are, but in particular with this board, we want a quorum of folks to get that critical mass. Everybody would probably qualify for the ability to go remotely, were it not for this idea that you had to have an in-person quorum for the meeting. So again, it's a little bit of an education process, and again, another reason that your work on these boards sort of came to my attention during the most recent session.
Right, I understand. You don't want the slippery slope of that all of a sudden everybody's going to be participating remotely in their pajamas. That people on your board of supervisors or your school board are going to be participating remotely, taking advantage. But we really worked very diligently with members like you and other folks who understand FOIA and public meetings, but also understand the needs of the disability community, and that the reason that people with disabilities are on these bodies is to ensure that the voice of people with disabilities is heard and is there as in an advisory manner or in an elected manner if they are chosen by their by their community. To have that voice heard, and that one of the things that always you hear, especially within the disability community, is that nothing about us without us, and the idea that when choices are made and laws are passed and rules are vetted, that the voice of the disability community, people who live with disabilities, people who care for people with disabilities, and people who work with people with disabilities, people who employ people with disabilities, people who serve people with disabilities, that voice is really important, that the lens of people with disabilities accessing our communities, accessing healthcare, accessing transit and housing and all these other things that all of us every day have to do, but that the lens of disability is put on it in order to ensure that there is access and accommodation for people and inclusion of people with disabilities in this work and our communities.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're successful. You used your legislative advocacy skills that you honed in Oklahoma and in Virginia, and as a legislative liaison to help with those boards. So when we get back after the break, we'll talk about some of the other initiatives that Fairfax is up to and what the board has been doing, and we'll learn about your role as a member of the state the Board of Disabilities, how that functions differently. I see that you're appointed by the governor. Your governor's appointee. We'll find out which governor it was that appointed Sarah Graham Taylor to the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. We'll do all that when we come back on the Inside Scoop with our guest, Sarah Graham Taylor.
Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. See ya, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are. Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about free nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches.
can prevent wildfires. Fire!
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi, I'm Marcus Simon. I'm your host for this week's Inside Scoop, and we are back with our guest, Sarah Graham Taylor. Sarah is the Franconia representative to the Fairfax area Disability Services Board and the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. So she's, again, you're a classic overachiever. Wasn't enough just to be on the county board, but you also got yourself appointed by Governor. Which governor was it?
It was Governor Ralph Northam.
Okay, so you must be nearing the end of your term.
I think my term ends in 2025, and my slot is as the parent of a child with an intellectual or developmental disability, and so I'm hopeful.
So it's not just anybody that they appoint. So everybody on the board, and we set up some of these boards this way from time to time, where you want to, for lack of a better term, check certain boxes, right? But we want to make sure that they cover a span and that different interest groups or different, what we call stakeholders, it seems a little bit of a cliche, but all the different stakeholders have a seat and a voice. And so you filled, which slot was this again?
I am the parent of a child with a developmental or intellectual disability, yes. And everyone who serves on this board sort of fills a role. And to harken back to something that Chris said, representation matters. And when you're talking about people with disabilities and making policy and doing the work of people with disabilities, representation matters, and ensuring that the voices of people with disabilities are heard. So the slots are, it's people, it's self-advocates, people who have and live with disabilities of various kinds. It is people who work with, sort of in the advocacy space. It's people who work in local government, who serve people in our community with disabilities, and individuals and families. And it's a really collaborative group. We meet quarterly. It is my favorite day of every quarter. It really is. Going in, hearing from people, talking with other folks who sort of live, this life and do the work that we do. It's a really refreshing, it's a really uplifting, enjoyable day. So it's one of my favorite days every quarter.
Very good. And so you guys are sort of responsible for a product, right? I mean, there's in addition to being a board and existing to advise, there's an actual document that you guys work on and produce and maintain. So tell us a little bit about that.
Correct. The Virginia Board for People with Disabilities every year does a 5-year state plan.
Wait a second. Every year they do a 5-year state plan?
So every 5 years we do a 5-year state plan, and every year we update that plan to ensure it is a living document, and to evaluate it, to look at it, to see what's going well, what might need to be changed, and to look for ways to have it be an evolving living document and not sort of a stale thing that gets put on a shelf and then you redo every 5 years.
So like in transportation, we have a 6-year plan for transportation projects, but as they get finished, you roll forward and add new things, because now 6 years out is 1 year closer.
Exactly, yes. And so the 5-year plan really looks at, it has goals and objectives and tactics to achieve those objectives. And the idea is to sort of address as many of the areas that impact people with disabilities as possible. And so we look, the 5-year plan looks at things like community supports. What do people with disabilities need in order to live in their community? It's health and safety. That's not just accessing healthcare, but it's how people with disabilities interact with law enforcement. It's how people with disabilities are dealt with in emergencies, in critical, what happens in a flood, what happens in a crisis. How do people with disabilities access safety? It deals with education and employment, obviously, whether it's K-12, the services that are available to kids in our public schools, or how do people with disabilities access job skills and job training, and become gainfully employed and be able to support themselves in Virginia. And then it's self-advocacy. It is teaching people with disabilities to advocate for themselves, and to to tell their stories and to access decision makers in a way that they can tell their story and influence what is being done, whether it's in Fairfax County or it's in Virginia or it's in Congress.
Yeah.
And so really teaching people to be self-advocates.
Right, and so we have some recent success stories, right? I think one of the issues to do with voting, right, was something, again, I think this was an issue. I think I carried the bill one year, but Elizabeth Bennett Parker again, I think successfully carried it, and it had to do with voting. Tell us a little bit about that bill. And I think, I'll add, after you talk about what it is, I think the role that self-advocates play to getting it passed.
Absolutely. Legislation, when curbside voting was first implemented, the law said that you could access curbside voting if you were over the age of 65 or if you had a physical disability. And we know that there are people who have disabilities that are not physical, for whom they want to vote, but accessing a voting booth, a large, noisy area, or having that one-on-one contact with people, whatever it is that makes it a challenge for them, that walking into a polling place might not be something that they are comfortable with, but they are people who want to vote and want to access their democracy. And technically, by law, they could not access curbside voting. And so legislation to change that from physical disability to any disability passed this past year, was signed by the governor. I'm sure you paved the way for that with your unsuccessful previous efforts. But I think you're right that self-advocates really...
one of the issues with that bill is, for what it's worth, is it seemed too easy, right? And probably didn't take it seriously enough. I'm like, we're just removing one word, right? We're just removing the word physical from the statute. And I showed up at Privileges and Elections, committee I'd previously chaired, but which I didn't chair that year, and said, I'm back, but this is a really easy one. We're just taking out the word physical because there are all kinds of disabilities that manifest. And we had, I think, one witness, Lucy B. Neal, and she did a great job, but the members of the committee just weren't impressed. They didn't quite get it. They figured if I was bringing it with some sort of liberal conspiracy to allow anybody to vote. So when we came back with it, I think it was one of those lessons learned, and we had testimony, remote testimony, by the way, right? You were allowed to participate from folks themselves, and I think having people see and hear from the folks that live with these disabilities themselves about what the challenges are with voting, why they wanted to see this happen, and understanding the fact they're testifying says, hey, you've got something to add to the process. You ought to be able to cast a vote for us as well, I think helped a lot. That may be partisan control. But anyway, self-advocacy certainly, I think, was an important piece of that. So we got a couple minutes left. Give us some good news stories. Tell us some things that you've been working on in the disability community that are uplifting. We hear a lot about the challenges, and sometimes it can be a lot of bad news these days. It can get depressing. Give us some good news.
I think the work that I most enjoy on the Disability Services Board here in Fairfax is looking at the challenges that we all face and sort of putting that disability lens on it. So looking at how do people with disabilities access transit and transportation. There was legislation a couple sessions ago to allow for a certain pot of money to go towards making bus stops more accessible, making sure that Fairfax County is accessing that money. Looking at ways to, I think a really great example is there's a member of the Fairfax Area Disability Services Board, Dr. Robin Renierson, who opened two businesses, Jake's Ice Cream and
Jake's Popcorn.
That's right, Jake's Popcorn. And not only is it a great product, but the idea is that most of the employees who work there are people who are differently able, people who live with disabilities, and it's people who get to access employment in their community with appropriate supports and really do really great fun work in the community in which they live and they grow up. And it's great ice cream. Highly recommend heading out to Jake's on a hot day for some ice cream, but also to support businesses like those that exist almost solely to, or at least initially, to support people in our community with disabilities. When I talk think about what Graham is going to be when he grows up, and what he's going to do. You talk about what your kid's going to do for their first job, and Graham's not going to be a lifeguard, and Graham's probably not going to babysit anybody else. But Graham could scoop ice cream at Jake's and enjoy the heck out of it and practice his math and really find himself in a situation where he could thrive and develop in a way that he might not, but for places like Jake's.
Well, Jake's is just like the width of Columbia Pike outside my district, so it's almost in the 13th legislative district. And Jake's Popcorn is in Seven Corners, which is in my district. So look forward to patronizing both of those places. And I've also seen Jake's does some catering sometimes for different events and political events, and so they'll bring the ice cream and bring the employees out to help serve it up to everybody. And it really is a heartwarming thing to see.
Next super hot mini golf tournament, I see an opportunity for a little Jake's ice cream to cool everybody down.
There you go. Well, you raise a good point too. I mean, a lot of times the services that are available to people with disabilities and different abilities are school-based. In the school, everybody goes to school, right? And it's free, and there's an opportunity to access the services there. And then as kids start to age out of some of those services, it becomes more challenging. So I think places like Jake's and other their bakeries and other, I know that provide a path forward for beyond those teen years and sort of for what comes next. And so I think that's great success. You have a new job now, right? So you're no longer with the City of Alexandria.
I am no longer with the City of Alexandria.
Right. You're now a professional lobbyist. You work for whoever the highest bidder is. Right?
I am a real grown-up lobbyist. Yes, and my friendship is now for sale.
Right. So, but you're still going to keep working on the disability services stuff.
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. I mean, this is this is what I love to do the most. Is what I have learned through my professional career, learning to be an advocate, being a professional advocate, and the privilege that I have of the access and the information that I have, being able to figure out ways to provide that information, that access, the tips and the tricks and the tools that I've been able to hone over the years to other families like ours who may not have the time or the money or the privilege or the access that I've been able to sort of develop over the years. Being able to find ways to provide that to others in the community is really really important to me. And whether it's serving on the special ed PTA at the schools that my kids go to, or these public bodies that I'm really privileged to serve on, it's really something that I will continue to do. I was recently elected the secretary of the Fairfax Area Disability Services Board, and my first meeting I forgot to bring a pen, so maybe I'll get better at the secretary part of it. But the advocacy part, I'm all in on.
We have just about a minute left to go. I was thinking about something that Chris said earlier. He found he was surprised at how supportive county government was of his initiatives. How do you find your local elected officials respond to the recommendations of the board? Do you find that it's a good group? Are we looking for ways to be helpful?
Absolutely. I think elected officials that I have had the privilege to work with are really looking for ideas and answers, and they're looking for incremental opportunities. We may not be able to solve every problem in one fell swoop, but if we can figure out ways to take small, bold steps towards the goals we're trying to achieve, they're in it. They're in for it.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work that you do. You don't have to be a policy wonk or a political professional like Sarah, though, to get involved. There are lots of ways to get involved in the boards and commissions for the things you care about and the things that matter to you. So I hope that you'll be inspired here to get involved in your community. You've been watching The Inside Scoop. I'm Marcus Simon, and I'm your ghost host this week. Your ghost host. What's the most?